So we have Geoffrey Zatkin? Zatkin, okay. It's pronounced like, yeah, Zatkin. I didn't see the case.
Eastern Europe.
Yes. And he actually is going to have a talk that he had on GC, a short version, about awesome video game data.
What's all lines?
Yeah, just put in the...
Am I going? Test? You guys hear me back there?
Yes, cool.
It's actually a hack. I noticed they alphabetize their talks, so this puts me at the top of the list every year. So people come see my talk. So, let's see, are we good? Let's go for it. Hi, my name is Geoffrey Zatkin. As you can probably tell from my accent, I am not from Europe. I'm actually from Southern California in San Diego. And I was a video game designer for about a decade professionally. One of my first big games was EverQuest. I did massively multiplayer games for about a decade. Before that, I was an indie designer. I did MUDs, I did mods, used to do StarCraft mods and Marathon, which was the precursor to Halo. And in 2006, I formed a business intelligence group with my partner, Greg Short, and we formed EDAR, which is at this point the biggest video game research firm in the world. And so all of this data you will see comes from either us or our data partners. And I like to introduce this talk by asking a very simple question that is very hard to answer. And the question is, how many units did Rock Band sell? And this is a really hard question to answer because there's a lot of different versions of Rock Band. So this is the one that came out on the Xbox 360, but there was also one that came out that you could get the instruments with it. So there were actually two things that you could have gone to the store and bought, and these both came out on the Xbox 360. But of course, the original Rock Band actually launched on 4 different platforms, and each of those platforms had 2 different SKUs, or 2 things you could have gone to the store to buy. So there were actually 8 things in the store called Rock Band when it came out that you could have bought. These all make up a distinct game. And of course, there were multiple Rock Band games. There's actually even more than that now, getting ahead of my slide. And for every single one of those, they released on multiple platforms with multiple SKUs per platform. So the basic question, when you're looking at a franchise like Rock Band, and you say, how many units did, for example, Rock Band 1 sell? Different people in different groups in the industry look at it in different ways. A marketer just might want to know, okay, for the distinct game, how many units did it sell so I can set my marketing budget against it? An executive at Microsoft might want to know, well, how many did we actually sell on the Xbox versus the PlayStation? And somebody at GameStop might want to know, well, okay, how many with and without the instrument got sold, so next time a Rock Band comes out, how many do I order to put on my shelves? So the actual answer to that question was in the US it sold 4.9 million units for $2/3 billion for the original Rock Band. For this talk, unless otherwise noted, everything is on a platform level, which means every SKU down below it is rolled up for one game when we're counting. And there will be a lot of counting of games here. In fact, speaking of counting of games and music games, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. And this, of course, if we go to mobile, is very similar. You look at a distinct game, all the platforms it comes out on, all the SKUs. You take something like Angry Birds, the original one came out regular and HD, the free and the paid versions. So there were 4 versions in the store you could have picked up. Though of course when you add mobile in, you start getting the region differences, and you multiply that across each one. And this is, if you ever get an Apple file with all of the reports, why it looks so big is they give you each of your game's SKUs per region. And that invented, in some cases, the big data problem in the video game industry. So my company, EDAR, of which I'm one of the 2 founders, is also sometimes known as the Game Genome Project. If you're familiar with Pandora, the Music Genome Project, which tracks thousands of attributes of music, we do this for games. I have a staff of in-house researchers that looks at every commercially released game, picks up, looks at it physically. We train them for about 3 months before they're allowed to put anything in, because every definition we track, any researcher has to be able to put it in exactly, otherwise we couldn't do huge data comparisons. We track about 2,500 objective attributes of games, meaning not opinion-based, but fact-based. Everything from use of brand and license to what kind of playable character, what kind of downloadable content, what kind of multiplayer, what kind of camera angle. And for this, we've done it for about 120,000 games at this point for 160 million unique data points. And pretty much anything you've ever heard of. And we work with every big publisher worldwide. We do a lot of their outsourced analysis, forecasting, etc. But it also gives me an excuse to come do cool talks because we have lots of data and it's fun to talk about data. So as I said, speaking about music and counting, I'm going to show you the clearest definition of a fad I've ever seen in the industry. This is the amount of music and rhythm genre games released by year, every year, quantity at a distinct level, meaning all of the SKUs, distinct level. So all of the SKUs and all of the platforms for Rock Band are rolled up into one game. So Rock Band here counts once. Rock Band 2 would count once as well. So you can see that for a long time, these are the best-selling games of the year at the bottom. Music and rhythm games meant dancing games, mostly Dance Dance Revolution. And then Guitar Hero came out. And suddenly everybody wanted to, well, not everybody, but many more people wanted to be making music games. So we spiked on the number of distinct games coming out per year. And then they basically burned that fat out on money, which I'll show you on the next slide, and we went back to dancing games again. There was basically a 4-year spike where it meant guitars and drums and microphones. If you look at how much money was made per year, you will see that this actually spikes considerably before the number of games that came out stopped growing. So some people were a little bit ahead of the fad and knew when to basically get in, make their money, and get out. The dancing games just kept going. But a whole bunch of other people lost a lot of money. So at this point, we're at the beginning of the 8th generation of video game consoles. A generation, for example, the 7th gen was the 360, the Wii, the PS3, 6th generation was the PS2, the Xbox, the GameCube. So we're many generations into the hardware, and we're in the middle of a grand experiment in how we now monetize our games. How do we pay for them? Because it used to be, back when I was making games, you'd put something in the store and you'd sell it and you were done. And then we started making MMOs and we could charge people subscriptions for long amounts of time, but we had to keep them playing for long amounts of time. And then there was downloadable content, adding extra levels, adding extra weapons, extra characters. And now they'll give away a game for free and try and sell you tiny little bits of the game as you go along. And all of these are perfectly valid methods, but I say the middle because there isn't necessarily a winner, nor will there ever be. The great thing about the game industry is we kind of expand to cover almost everything we do. So I'll apologize in advance that some of these stats are US-based, but this was originally prepped to be a US talk, and it's at least a large market. But at this point, 59% of Americans are gamers in one way or another, between mobile, consoles, web, it's kind of all the way across. And the average US household, 51% own a console, but on average they own 2. And the average US household owns at least one dedicated either console, PC, or smartphone. So at this point, almost everybody has a place to play, and play they do. If we wanted to look at hardware, this is platform sales worldwide up to the end of 2014. And if you like any of these stats, I've already given Lynn here a copy of this presentation, so you can ask her or just ask me for a card and I'll email you the deck. But you can kind of see here, this is really important to game developers because, for example, if you were making a game for the Xbox 360, which sold 80 million units worldwide, the most copies of a game you could ever sell would be 80 million, one per Xbox. And this is basically install base. And you may ask, why are there no phones up here? Phones are hard because I think this is my 4th or 5th iPhone I've owned. I'm not exactly sure which. So when you're looking at install base, most people don't buy 5 or 6 Xbox 360s. But if you're looking at PCs or phones, it's very hard to figure out, okay, well, how many are actually active to get an active install base? But if you wanted to actually see what phones would look like on comparison to that chart, it would look like this for the iPhone, which is a lot of them. And the lighter numbers are the ones that were actually sold last year. So 25% of the iPads and 28% of the iPhones worldwide were sold in 2014. So it's still a growing market, or a very good growing market. Android is a lot harder on that because of the fragmentation problem, which is all of the different types of Android devices that come out. And that makes it almost impossible to tell exactly how many are in use with the turnover. But for the top Android devices, they do just as well as the top, or as the iOS devices. But it's a lot of the lower quality ones sold throughout China and India that make counting some of this very hard. So speaking of mobile and hardware, there are just at this point under 200 million consumers in North America and Canada ages 13 plus that own a smartphone or tablet. And 68% of them actively play mobile games. So it's about 142 million active North American mobile gamers aged 13 and above. One of the fun things is you can kind of see the growth over the past years, but the amount of people playing has pretty much remained right at 2/3, 67, 68% every year. So as we add more hardware, we get an increase in the number of gamers, which means that we haven't capped the market out yet. It's still an open market and growing, and we expect this to happen for at least the next couple of years. It's also worth noting amongst mobile gamers that even though 50% on both a smartphone and a tablet, the monetization is heaviest on people who own both a smartphone and a tablet, which is in the blue color. That 76% of the monetization comes from 50% right now of the ownership. One of the fun things when you look at age of games, of gamers in America, and this is a survey done by the ESA, is that back in 2004, it was their very low age of 29 years old, going all the way up to 37. And then in 2012, they started counting smartphones as a playable device, and the age dropped dramatically. But if you look at this, it's really interesting in that there's a fallacy that games are for children. And just looking at the average age of the gamer, you can see that this is completely false. Children like games in the same way they like movies and TV and comic books and, I mean, all of the other forms of entertainment. But games have always been for people with a credit card who could actually go out and buy them. Otherwise, this wouldn't be a sustainable industry. And the age of the gamer has basically risen and will continue to rise again because a lot of people who start playing games never stop playing games. And at a certain point, games will just be another ubiquitous form of entertainment, and nobody will wonder, you know, should we be doing interesting things in games? You know, in the same way, I wouldn't show my nephew or niece almost any of the movies that won Oscar awards last year. You know, those were for adults. There are a lot of games that are made specifically for adults, and there are a lot of games that are made for children, and for teenagers, and for different groups with different interests. So if we break the age down, you can see blue is 18 years and older, gray is 18 to 35, and yellow is 36 plus. We've almost reached parity across the diversification of age for gamers. And of course, looking at this though, different age groups behave differently. So for example, if you look at mobile, the people who pay the most money, the heavy payers of the whales, which I'll get to in a moment, actually skew older. This is different. Actually, a couple years ago, this chart was reversed, where the non-payers were a little bit older. But as we put the mobile devices in the hands of more and more children, it's actually dropped the age back down, so we see. And this is the first year that the average age of a heavy payer or whale is exactly the same age as the average gamer, 31. So speaking of whales, whales are the industry slang for the people who pay the most money on games in the industry. And if you kind of look at this for America right now, you'll see that 45% of gamers, or about 65 million of them, pay no money on their mobile spending habit per month. This is basically how much money does your average mobile gamer spend per month. 49% spend between a penny and $9.99 per month, and 6% spend $10 or more per month. And this is actually a slightly easier way to visualize it. This is actually, the non-payers are actually down. Last year it was 50%, so we've actually gained 5% on them, which also bodes well for the industry. If we look at this kind of side by side, for the amount of revenue brought in, non-payers obviously bring in 0% of the revenue, hence the name non-payer. Moderate payers, or the $10 or less, bring in about 50% of the revenue, and heavy payers, the 6%, bring in the other 50% of the revenue that comes in on mobile and tablet games. So this is vastly skewed towards people who, when they like a game, are able to keep putting money into it. If we look at PC free-to-play, you'll see that it's similar, except that the heavy payers pay even disproportionately more of that, to the point where the 99th percentile actually accounts for 15% of the revenue brought in on PC free-to-play. So again, a very small number of people are driving, in some cases, a lot of the money, though a lot of the people are bringing in some of the money. Returning to Who Games, on the ratio of male to female gamers, you can see that over the years, it's also starting to reach parity, going back to 2004 and up to 2014. And if you want a nice simple view of that, at this point, 45% of the gamers are women, 55% are male. Though this skews across the hardware platform. So for example, on mobile, with women in the kind of purple, there are more women mobile players than there are men, 55 to 45. Handhelds go down to 45% female and consoles to 40%. But that still is a very good mixture and a very healthy mixture. That being said, we're seeing that in a lot of cases, because women are newer to the market in mass, not in players. There have always been a tremendous amount of female players, but as we're picking up the mobile and the social games and bringing in a larger percentage of women, these are not necessarily consumers who are used to paying a lot of money for their gaming experience. So if you look at the bottom, with male being 40% of mobile gamers and female being 56%, you can see that the heaviest payers are disproportionately mobile. We have, however, over time seen this starting to come down and reach parity, and this is something that I expect in another couple of years also won't be a terribly interesting graph, which in and of itself will be awesome. Let's see. However, if we swap this around and say, well, not just paying money to be kind of considered core for how much you are, but if you also count time played, we actually slice this to be a very interesting way. So if you called a core person somebody who both engages heavily on paying and plays a lot of the time, and you call a casual player somebody who plays a very little amount of time and usually pays nothing, you get a really interesting graph when you look at the male and female use. So for demographics, if you kind of take the casual out, doesn't pay anything and doesn't play much, and you then look semi-casual all the way up to core, you see male and female, especially on core, are actually very close to parity on that, and then closer along the way. Women tend to fall into the first three buckets, and men tend to fall into the third, fourth, and fifth, or second, third, and fourth. But it's still a lot closer when you look at that, and then you can also look at the age climbing up to 31, where the core is, again, this year happening to hit the exact average age of the gamer, which is purely random on that, but still kind of interesting. So if we look at that across mobile and consoles, and divide the light payer and payer to moderate to heavy, one of the interesting things too is on mobile, the most two endorsed genres are the same for males and females. You can see right up there on matching puzzle and brain puzzle. And if you look on consoles, you'll see this disproportionately shifts towards heavy payers because almost everybody who buys a console game is by definition a whale, spending more than $10 a month on their gaming habit. That they also, for the top 5 genres, match, though they're in a different order for which ones are endorsed the most. But the gamers of today are entertainment consumers, and they're pretty much co-opting every single dedicated media device and turning it into a gaming platform. And game they do. The average mobile gamer spends about 5 hours per week playing mobile games of their 9 hours of total gaming time. And these hours are similar for non-payers and moderate payers. But if we look at heavy payers, or the whales, they spend about 11 hours a week on mobile gaming of their 26 hours of gaming time. And if you break that down to see what they're actually playing, you can see the smartphone and the tablet on the top in kind of the purple and red, and then console, handheld, and PC below that. And this is really important for developers to know this because basically the whales of mobile gaming consist of people who are already used to paying money for games. These are people who grew up playing console or PC games. This is not 100% true. We've brought in a wide range of new audiences, and skewing younger, they're in some cases not as used to paying for the content. But a lot of the people paying the most money are people who are used to playing because they're playing on all of these different devices where they pay money as well to play. So speaking of sales, video game sales as reported by NPD, which is the premier sales tracking group in the US, are a roughly $16 billion a year industry in the States. But this is primarily retail sales. This captures very poorly the digital sales, things like World of Warcraft subscriptions, League of Legends microtransactions, all of the money coming in from mobile. So this is a vastly underreported number. If we actually had digital coming in, this graph would be continuing to climb actually off of the room I have right there. But this is also, again, is great. It's showing that we're a growing industry, and the lure of these sales have led to a renaissance in the creation of video games. And as you can see from the next slide, this is every single commercially released console, handheld, and PC game in the United States. And you can see that the number's been going up over, actually wait, that's not right. That isn't because that's retail. This is the number of retail-only games. If you put digital on top of that and say retail and digital games released in the United States, we have a chart that looks more like this. And if you'd seen me do my talk for the past 3 years, this is actually an annual talk for a while at GDC. At this point, people would say, okay, it's going to go down again, and now you're going to say, oh, we're missing mobile. But something actually really interesting happened this year, is if I show the last 2 years of this, so this is all retail and digital, handheld, console, and PC titles, you see that it's actually been going radically up again and passing its peak from 2010. And this is a really big surprise. So if we look at where they're coming from, blue is going to be the 7th generation console, so the 360, the PS3, and the Wii. Gray is going to be 8th gen console, So the Wii U, the Xbox One, and the PS4. Yellow is handheld. And red is Steam. Steam is the biggest digital PC marketplace at this point in the world. And there have been a couple of games released on Steam over the past few years. So if we take this to be just Steam, to make this easier to read, you can see that in 2013, and then especially in 2014, there have been a lot of games released on Steam. And, let's see, oops, ahead of my notes. And if we look at the Steam active users over time, you can see that we've gone from about 65 million up to 100 and, what is that? 25 million, I think. Hold on, I've lost my notes. There we go. And recently they had a concurrent peak of 8.9 million users signed on at the same time. So arguably, Steam has become the PC destination. Though you still get big ones like World of Warcraft, League of Legends, but Steam as an aggregate site is large. And I'll actually be talking about Steam Greenlight later. So if we go back to games released, there's obviously still been mobile tablet, which is a huge amount of games. It's bite-sized gaming. You know, it's now socially acceptable to play a game almost anywhere, which wasn't the case a decade ago. You didn't see people in bars sitting there playing games on their, while they're waiting for somebody to show up on their phone. But there are a tremendous amount of iPhone and Android games released every year. Last year in 2014, there were more than 100,000 games just on iOS in the US released. So when comparing numbers, that's actually kind of a useless number. So what I do is I take basically any game that's ever made a top 50 on any of the charts, and I count that as a game. And if we look at that, this is how the quantity of games released last year looks like. 4%, or it's the 7th gen is blue, 8th gen is gray, handheld is yellow, Steam is red, Android is purple, and iOS, again, top 50 for iOS and Android is green. So you see that there, even with just hitting things that have only hit the top 50, there's still a tremendous amount more games released digitally, both on mobile tablet and on PC, than there are actually on console. And this leads to a really good question, which is why do I still talk about console? And I talk about console because in a lot of cases, the money is still very interesting on this. So way back, years and years ago, all the way in 2010, the best-selling game was Call of Duty Modern Warfare, $1.15 billion. Battlefield 1943 on XBLA, PSN got 17 million, Sims on iOS got 11 million. In 2011, Modern Warfare 2 and its map packs made as much money as Angry Birds did. In 2012, Black Ops hit $1.6 billion, highest grossing game at that point. All of Zynga put together hit $1.1 billion. Angry Birds has now passed Call of Duty map packs, which is great. I'm not going to walk through every single year out here since we have some time, but I talk about console still because console still makes a tremendous amount of money in the industry. So if we want to look at best-in-class examples, the $2 billion club has 2 games in it, Black Ops 2 and Grand Theft Auto 5. The $1.5 billion club has 2 games in it, Ghosts and World of Warcraft. Going down to the $1 billion club, we actually now start to see some of the mobile come in. Get Candy Crush, get Clash of Clans, get PC with Crossfire, get League of Legends. And if you hit the $500 million club, now we start getting really diverse with the kinds of games coming in. But I show this because it's very easy in the video game industry to get myopic and say, oh, I'm doing mobile games, so mobile's everything. Or I'm doing console games, so console's everything. Or I'm doing web browser games. But the game industry just kind of expands and keeps, taking over every hardware platform that we can. And it's leading to a massive amount of very diverse places to put games out and to monetize your games on. Speaking of monetization, if you're looking at core retail, this is what a traditional curve looks like, which is you make 90-something% of your money in the first 3 months of sales. This has actually, over the past generation, become even more extreme, where blue is 05 to 7, gray is 08 to 010, and yellow is 11 to 13. And if you put this in bar graph format, which is a little easier to look at, you can see that the first month sales are becoming even more important. They're spiking higher for each of those 3 time periods. So we're equivalently front-loading more and more into the first month or 2. And for retail, there's a variety of reasons for this. We've had a console generation transfer, where the stores in some cases are short of shelf space. There are also a lot of stores that want to sell used games, so the amount of shelf space that they dedicate for new games has shrunk over the years, which means that they want to get the games in, sell them, clear them out for new games to come in and replace them on the shelf. So it's basically made people front load, market, and basically get their game out there even more. That being said, retail is definitely not the only place to make money, even for retail games. So one way is downloadable content, or DLC. So blue is the average amount of paid downloadable content per game that is game affecting, meaning it's a map pack, it's a new character to play, it's not a trailer, it's not an avatar, it's not a demo, it's something you can actually use in the game. Gray is the number if you take out the music games. Music, because of the amount of downloadable songs, disproportionately skews the amount of DLC per game. You get games like Rock Band with more than 1,000 songs you can download, that will skew an average number. So what you can see is a lot more games are looking to monetize in-game, even for a premium console release. If you look over at mobile, right now, 92% of the money comes from in-app purchases, and 8% comes from actually selling your game. So speaking of mobile, there's a lot of different reasons people play mobile games. The top 3 reasons that people play mobile games in North America and Europe are to relax, to pass time while waiting, and to take a break. That almost never in there, it's like, hey, I'm looking for a fun experience. Mobile is a relaxation thing. People play mobile games usually in 2-minute increments, sometimes 3. Tablet has a longer play period. But when you start looking core versus casual, where I'll break this down, there's also different behaviors within that. So for example, places that people use to discover mobile games, with core on the top 5 and casual on the bottom. Top of the charts is number 1, featured is number 2, word of mouth and saw somebody playing, number 3 and 4, and a video is number 5. Social is very high on this, the word of mouth and saw somebody playing. So basically, if you can't get on the top of the store, making a game that people want to talk about and giving them ways to talk about it and share their experience is a very, very strong source of discovery, or people finding out about the game. If you're looking for reasons that people actually then go and share the game, that they want to go out and be viral, the number 1 endorsed reason is actually the quality of the art. How good does the game look? Number 2 is the innovation. Oh, there was this cool new thing I saw in a game. Number 3 is the challenge level. A lot of people, if it is too hard or too easy, are not actually interested in the game. If you're looking at the top endorsed reasons that not they just find out or talk about it, but why do they actually then go and download or purchase the game, the number 1 endorsed reason is cost. If you think the game costs more than the value you see for it, you will not pick up the game. Number 2 is the genre. So if I'm like, hey, I know this awesome racing game, and you don't like racing games, you're not going to get the game, even if the cost is right. Number 3 is a friend's recommendation. So going back to the social factor. So if I come to you and I say, hey, there's this awesome racing game, and you're like, oh, I like racing, and I could pay $1 for that, then that is the basically next pickup quality. Churn, why do people leave? The single most common reason people leave a game is it just becomes too difficult to play without paying more money. And the second is waiting for basically, you wait too long for progress. And in a lot of cases, that's people throwing pay gates and barriers inside. Brands are very important on mobile gaming. Established mobile brands are the single best way to basically help spread the name of your game, because they're things that people look at. And you can see that mobile and, actually let me switch this over to core and casual. Core being light blue. Console and mobile games are the single best brands right now to actually get people to play. This is because for a core audience, they've heard of your game, they know about it, and they're therefore more likely to pick it up. So this is also a story about games penetrating society across a variety of storefronts, both on digital and the new digital, which is the console storefronts. There's been a really interesting shift on the release patterns of console games over the generation, where you see blue is physical-only releases, meaning they did not release a digital version. Gray is digital-only releases, so they only released a digital version. And yellow is a physical-digital combination. And what you can see is that retail-only games are going away, games that will only sell brick and mortar. And at this point, the only people who do that are games with an attached physical component, say Skylanders, or a music game where you need an instrument. Everybody else basically says, we will also sell a digital copy in addition to our physical copy. So that you see is the yellow is the physical digital again, and the tiny blue this year is the amount of physical only games released. If we're looking at PC revenue, transitioning a little bit, sorry I'm going a little bit faster, but I want to get as much of this in as I can. Blue is PC retail only amount of money comes in. Gray is PC digital, and yellow is PC free-to-play. And you can see that free-to-play is a very growing area, and that digital is also going very strongly. If you remember the Steam slide from a bit ago, and the number of games coming out. If you look over on the PC free-to-play, you saw that yellow growing bar, all of the revenue, literally all of it, is coming from 3 genres of games right now. RPGs, strategies, and shooters for free-to-play. You'll note the little MMO denotation next to RPG. Well, MMO is obviously not a genre. You know, you could have an MMO, you could have a shooter MMO, a fantasy or an RPG MMO, a racing MMO. All of the RPGs that are making money on free-to-play currently are MMOs. So it was worth tagging on that. Kind of switching to a little bit of a different thing for money. Right now there is a direct correlation between your review score, or kind of the assumed average score of the game. This is an aggregate score, so from hundreds of sites, and the amount of revenue brought in. So this is every single 6th, 7th, and 8th generation console, handheld, and PC game released. So this is basically the year 2000 up to 2014. And you can see every 10 basically review score points, you jump on a 100-point scale, you get a dramatic lift in sales. If we look at just the 7th and 8th gen, used to be 7th gen, but this year we can throw 8th gen in, you see it's actually even more so. So one of the things that normally I would talk a lot about, but I'm just going to speak a little bit about, is we did some really interesting correlations between basically the launch of games, the console cycle, and when they came out, and if it was a new or existing IP. And this, in the next couple slides, I'm just going to give you the really short version. What we found out is that for a new IP release, so a new brand, a new property, in the 7th generation, review score definitely mattered on that. And you see the same, on the 8th generation it spiked. You'll notice there is no red bar here. At the time I put this together 2 months ago, there had not yet been an 8th generation console release with an 87 plus review score. There is now one, but my jet lag is keeping me from remembering the name. If we look at an existing IP, you will see that here's where it gets really interesting. For the 8th generation of consoles, pretty much 80 is the new magic number. And that because of all now the YouTube and the Twitch and the people sharing with the virality, a game now is either good enough or it isn't. Because you'll notice there's also then a drop off below that compared to the 7th generation of games, where if you're below an 80, you're selling even less than you did the last generation. And then, again, there's a lot of math behind this, but basically 80 is the new 90. Games are either good enough to kind of catch people and make them think this is worth doing, or they're not. And this is actually interesting because we did a bit of research too on what is the threshold quality for downloadable content. Because a very simple way to think about this is people have to like your game before they will pay you more money for that same game. And the magic number was also 80. So 80 does kind of seem to be the number where this is how good a game needs to be to really take off. That being said, if you look at the game quality over the years, the average number is right around 70 for the average review score. This is every retail console and PC title released in the past more than a decade. So on a really quick version of this, so I used to work for a while at Monolith Productions, which was one of the best studios for development that never sold many games because they have always had very little on their marketing budget. And we're going to do this really quick, but Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft basically mean everything put out on that console, not games released by them. So if at the bottom is review score, basically bottom third of reviews and then top third, and then we have bottom third of marketing spend and the top third of marketing spend. You see this could have been a grid of 9 boxes, but we've taken out all the middles. Basically you get a 1.0 sales if you're in the lower third, bad reviews, bad marketing, or low marketing, low reviews. The top gets a spike on basically release sales. And then the question is, which does better for you, marketing or quality? And as a previous game designer, this breaks my heart to say, but marketing gives you, or quality gives you a lift, but marketing gives you more of a lift. Ideally, you want both, if you can get them. You'll notice the Nintendo discrepancy. That's because there were a total of 2 games, total, that fell into the high review score, but low on marketing. good games on Nintendo tend to get a lot of marketing money behind them. And what this really comes down to is a little bit depressing, but basically it's that there's so many games out there that if your game isn't really good and doesn't spend a lot of marketing, nobody hears about it, which means that nobody buys it. And we're going to skip over retail in-store advertising. There's been a lot of advertising, the quantity's going up. At this point in the US, 6% of the retail titles account for 75% of the direct media or marketing spend since 2008. When I did this a couple of years ago, it was 9%, so it's consolidated even more. And the money coming in, 8% of the titles, retail account for 75% of the revenue. And this was 12.5 a couple of years ago when we did it. But the cool thing is, as much as this is a story about the industry in some cases consolidating and going big, it's also that we're going small again. That there are new ways to finance and push your game forward that don't necessarily need a lot of money. Kickstarter being crowdfunding, and one of the kind of best examples, they have $1.5 billion pledged through Kickstarter so far, 317 million through games, 15,000 successfully funded games, and basically 1/3 of the games that go on Kickstarter get successfully funded, 34%, but 1/3 is close enough. And of that funding, this is the distribution of funding that you see on Kickstarter. At this point, when I did this, there were 38 games that had gotten $1 million or more. At this point, there's actually 40. 2 have come in the last month and a half. Crowfall and, I'll think of it later. But, however, if you're unsuccessful on your funding, 10% of games get no funding whatsoever. 61% get into the 1 to 20% funding, and you kind of see the rest of it there. But crowdfunding is a lot of work to get your money, but if you can do it, it is a great way because you get to come in, appeal directly to your consumer and engage them from the beginning, and they become in some cases some of your best advocates. Similar to this, Steam Greenlight is basically a way that you can get your game out and people paying for it before you're actually having your game done. And one of the dangers to both Kickstarter and Steam Greenlight is that, so this is the quantity of Steam Greenlight games per month release. So remember the huge spike in Steam.
Yes, sorry, it's just because it says early access on the slide.
Oh, I'm sorry, early access, not Greenlight, thank you.
It is early access.
It is early access, my jet lag kicked in. Thank you for pointing that out, otherwise I would have kept calling it that. So Steam Early Access is a way to basically let people pay you money for your game, put it out early, and they play along as you develop it. And again, kind of like Kickstarter, you can get a whole bunch of advocates in here because these are people already willing to give you money for your game who get very engaged with it. So this is the number of games released, and this is the number of games released. So blue now is released, gray is not released as a full game yet. Basically what we're seeing is only 1/3 of the games doing this have yet released. And this is across pretty much the entire time period. So even going back to the first 9 games released on early access, only 3 of them have actually come out yet. So the danger for this is, with Kickstarter, if we put out a lot of Kickstarters, we do a lot of early access, and people don't actually put out the games, this will be a well that dries up. We burn the consumers enough time. Game players are smart people. They're not going to keep paying for it. But if we can put out really awesome stuff this way, this is a great way to alternately finance some of the games or the early game development, maybe enough to then take it, to a publisher to get the rest of your funding later. There's a lot of cool ways to work this out. I'm going to kind of wrap this up with one more interesting thing going on, which is Twitch. So for those of you who aren't aware, Twitch is a place you can watch people, at this point mostly, play live video games. It is the 3rd biggest consumer of bandwidth in the United States, right after Netflix and YouTube. And it was actually acquired by Amazon for roughly $1 billion a bit ago. They draw 60 million fans every month to watch people play games. We did a little report on this where we basically tracked every single Twitch channel for 3 months and sampled every half hour to see how many people were playing. And so we turned this into what we call view volume, and you can see League of Legends up there was the #1. The top 5 games are basically competitive multiplayer games. Games that you play against other people and that people enjoy watching people play. League of Legends, Dota 2, Hearthstone, Counter-Strike Go, World of Warcraft. And you can see only 39% is left for the rest of the market. And this is everything from the official sites to streamers going on for that. And when you look at the concurrent viewership, you'll notice that League got up to about 120 or 110,000. You can kind of see everybody else dancing around. But if you look at peak viewership, you'll notice there are certain things on Twitch that drive attraction. So if you look here, you'll see on the peak viewership, we've jumped up to just under 800,000 people. And this was because in Q4 of last year, this was when the League of Legends World Finals were going on. The qualifiers, the quarter, semi, and World Finals. And you can see the spike in viewership for each of those. And this is because in a lot of cases, people who play free-to-play games like participating or watching esports. 39% of them that play actually watch. And they primarily watch MOBA games first, card games second, shooters third, RPGs fourth. And the final slide I'll end on here, and one of the reasons for this is it's also aspirational. You'll note the line is the number of tournaments for esports that have been going on over the years. And you see we started with about, about 100 back in 2010, and we had 1,500 last year. And you'll notice the prize pool has also gone up from a couple million in 2010 to 15 million in 2013 to 35 million in 2014. And so this is drawing a large number of people who are very interested in all these things. Kind of think, man, I could do that. And this is really cool because it's now possible to make a living not only just publishing games, but also playing them. So thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your conference. Hopefully I didn't keep you too long.
We have time for a couple of questions, maybe 2 questions. Yeah.
Yeah, you said this is of course numbers very impressive and huge, and you could talk about the industry, but I don't know, is it research educational, or are you have a customer there? Are they interested, or just the gaming industry?
Our number one source of customers are publishers, because it's more cost efficient for one group to spend a lot of people time doing this and then be able to distribute the information. Our second most common are actually retailers, people like GameStop or other people who want to kind of know. After that, it's developers and actually investment firms with a tiny smattering of like TV stations or other people. People who want to know, hey, what games should I hit up to see if they want to do advertising on my station or other things like that. We work with education. My hard part is, so this is a privately funded company. My buddy and I started it, we bootstrapped it all the way up. And it's really hard on education to give out data because once it goes out, it kind of goes out into the wild, and this is how we make our living, is selling. So a lot of the time, I'll team up with somebody who's from education and see what we can get them to just help them out and work that way. But we've worked with a couple groups. Jesse Schell out of Carnegie Mellon has been a customer in the past, a couple other people, or we'll sometimes do special reports or put them together for a class or a school on a topic they're interested in, or I'll send one of my analysts out to just go talk at the class for a while, or Skype with them. So I try and keep it out. I try and keep it separate because people like EA ask for most favored nation. They say, well, if you charge somebody this much, we want to pay that much too. So we just find other ways to do it.
I was just wondering, because this talk was for an American audience, are there a lot of similarities between Europe and America?
America and Europe are almost identical on almost everything. There's obviously a different rating system. Different countries behave slightly differently on their preference for genres of games, slightly different age groupings, but if you were going to take this, for kind of macro trending, you would be perfectly fine going macro trending with this between the US, Europe, and Australia, and Canada. Yes?
I was wondering, you had some really nice data about game discovery and mobile stuff. I was wondering if you had any numbers or any general tendencies regarding game discovery and Steam, since they really mixed the bag
Well, yeah, discovery is just a huge problem. I mean, Steam is similar, though with their new curation system. I'm going to be really curious to see how that affects it. I don't know off the top of my head, but if you send me an email, I can look and see what some of our macro numbers for that are, too. Bless you. Anybody else? Or cool. Looks like we'll call it a day. Thanks.